how Alan Greenspan, a man who believed in the philosophy of little government interference and few rules of regulation, could end up becoming chairman of the greatest regulatory agency in the country is beyond me, Walters said in 2008. How did it happen? Among other things, Alan Greenspan was one of the first Americans to really understand the nature of celebrity in the mass media age. 30 years before Paris Hilton, Greenspan managed to become famous for being famous, and levered that skill into one of the most powerful jobs on earth. Alan Greenspan's political career was built on a legend, the legend of the ultimate Wall Street genius, the man with all the answers. But the legend wasn't built on his actual performance as an economist. It was a reputation built on a reputation. In fact, if you go back and look at his rise now, his career path has a lot less in common with economist icons like Keynes or Friedman than it does with celebrity con artists like L. Ron Hubbard, Tony Robbins, or Beatles guru Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. Like the Maharishi, Greenspan got his foot in the big door by dazzling, deluded celebrities with voluble, pseudo-mystical nonsense. One of his big breaks came when a lawyer named Leonard Garment introduced him to Dick Nixon in 1968. Garment would later describe Greenspan's bloviating on economic matters in that meeting as Nepal Kathmandu language. Nixon, nonetheless, was impressed, saying, "That's a very intelligent man." Later, he brought him into the campaign, and although Greenspan eventually declined a formal role in Nixon's government, he would henceforth thrive in a role as economic guru to men with power, a role that the press somehow never failed to be made aware of. When he finally did come into government full-time as head of Ford's Council of Economic Advisers, glowing accounts of Greenspan's authority in the White House routinely appeared in the press. Greenspan has a unique relationship with the president, crowed Businessweek, which added that, according to one aide, on economic policy, Allen is a heavyweight. Future right-wing Godzilla Dick Cheney, then serving as Ford's chief of staff, added in the New York Times Magazine that President Ford attached more weight to Greenspan's views than those of any other among his economic advisers. Sometimes Greenspan himself was the source of the compliments. The New Yorker in 1974, addressing the inflation issue that was hot at the time, offered this hilarious piece of praise. Economists of all persuasions, with the exception of Alan Greenspan, an Ayn Rand disciple who heads the President's Council of Economic Advisers, admit to being baffled by today's problems. Not long after that, in 1975, Greenspan became the first economist to grace the cover of Newsweek. By then, he had also already been named to Time's illustrious Board of Economists, which met 4 times a year to harumph about economic matters for the mag. Greenspan was even asked for an interview by Penthouse that same year, although he declined. That Greenspan has always been intensely interested in press attention is something that virtually every source I spoke with accepts almost without question. His interest in the media can even be seen in his personal life. He dated in succession 3 different prominent television figures, moving from Barbara Walters in the late 70s to MacNeil-Lehrer producer Susan Mills in the 80s, to the woman he ultimately married, NBC correspondent Andrea Mitchell. One reporter for a major daily newspaper who covered the Fed in the 90s tells of getting frantic calls from Greenspan's office at 7 in the morning after a negative piece appeared. "I was still half asleep, but the chairman was already unhappy," he said. Around the same time, Paul Weller, a University of Iowa professor, who wrote a blisteringly critical paper on Greenspan, was hounded for a copy by Fed press aides before it was even published. Allen himself wanted to see it, the author chuckles now. Greenspan was exceptionally skilled at pushing his image of economic genius, particularly since his performance as an economic prognosticator was awful at best. He was supposedly the smartest man in the world, laughs economist Brian Westbury today. He was the greatest, the maestro. Only if you look at his record, he was wrong about almost everything he ever predicted. Fed watchers and Greenspan critics all seem to share a passion for picking out which of Greenspan's erroneous predictions was the most ridiculous. One of his most famous was his pronouncement in the New York Times in January 1973. "It's very rare that you can be as unqualifiedly bullish as you can now," he said. The market proceeded to lose 46% of its value over the next 2 years, plunging from above 1,000 the day of Greenspan's prediction to 571 by December 1974. Greenspan was even bad at predicting events that had already happened. In April 1975, Greenspan told a New York audience that the recession wasn't over, that the worst was yet to come. The economy swiftly improved, and the National Bureau of Economic Research later placed the end of the recession at March 1975, a month before Greenspan's speech. Greenspan's career is full of such pronouncements. In July 1990, at the start of the recession that would ultimately destroy the presidency of George H.W. Bush, Greenspan opined, "In the very near term, there's little evidence that I can see to suggest the economy is tilting over into recession." Months later, as the bad news continued, Greenspan soldiered on. "Those who argue that we are already in a recession, I think, are reasonably certain to be wrong." By October, with the U.S. in the 6th of what would ultimately be 10 consecutive months of job losses, Greenspan remained stubborn. "The economy," he said, "has not yet slipped into recession." The economy has a lot in common with the weather. And even very good economists, charged with the job of predicting market swings, can become victims of unexpected turns, just like meteorologists. But Greenspan's errors were often historic, idiotic blunders, evidence of a fundamental misunderstanding of problems that led to huge disasters. In fact, if you dig under almost every one of the major financial crashes of our time, you can find some kind of Greenspan quote cheerfully telling people not to worry about where the new trends in the economy were leading. Before the S&L crisis exploded, Greenspan could be seen giving a breezy thumbs up to now notorious swindler Charles Keating, whose balance sheet Greenspan had examined. He said that Keating's Lincoln Savings and Loan has developed a series of carefully planned, highly promising, and widely diversified projects, and added that the firm presents no foreseeable risk to the Federal Savings and Loan Corporation. The mistake he made in 1994 was even worse. After a few relatively small-scale disasters involving derivatives of the sort that would eventually nearly destroy the universe in 2008, Greenspan told Congress that the risks involved with derivatives were negligible. Testimony that was a key reason the government left the derivatives market unregulated. His misreading of the tech bubble of the late 90s is legendary. More on that later. He also fell completely for the Y2K scare, and at one point early in the George W. Bush presidency, actually worried aloud that the national debt might be repaid too quickly.